Today, we're going to be comparing Sweden versus Sri Lanka, some of the big differences that I find between the two countries. Now, I do want to say thank you to all of my subscribers who've been writing in and some of you who've been giving me ideas for videos. And this is one of the video topics. Somebody wrote to me and asked me to do a comparison between Sri Lanka and Sweden. And while there's so many things to compare, I wanted to start off with some of the big things. So in this video, I'm going to cover 3 to 4 big differences that I find between the two countries, and I'm saving the biggest for the end. First thing on my list is gender equality. Now, I find a huge discrepancy between the two. Everybody knows Sweden is really big on gender equality, even though we've seen a decline in it for the last couple of years, which is not really very good. But Sweden is high up there. It is still high up there amongst one of the best countries in the world when it comes to gender equality. Now, in Sri Lanka, we do have a long way to go, considering that Sri Lanka was the first country to elect a female prime minister in the 1960s. Even with that milestone in mind, we still have a long way to go when it comes to gender equality. In Sri Lanka, the women are expected to bear the brunt of the housework and looking after the children, even though they do have a full-time job. And in Sweden, most of those household chores and looking after children is split between men and women pretty equally, I would say. Wages in Sri Lanka, there is a huge discrepancy between men and women doing the same jobs. I had a friend of mine say that she had a friend applied for a job and she got a certain salary and she wanted to find out how much the men were getting, and HR refused to give out that kind of information. And obviously that's because she was getting paid a lot lower than the men. It is the norm in Sri Lanka, although things are getting better. Now, if anybody's watching from Sri Lanka and knows anything about this, please weigh in. This is what I've researched and through people I've been speaking with. So let me know in the comments below. More than half of the Sri Lankan population is made up of female. Females' literacy and education is really, really high. It is 93% compared to the males, 92%. So where that's concerned, women are really up there in Sri Lanka. But when you translate that into the workforce, only 31% of women are within the workforce, and the senior management roles and in the public or private sector are very, very underrepresented by Sri Lankan women. But to compare how many women have seats in parliament within the two countries is astounding, the difference. Only 10% of the Sri Lankan parliament is made up of women. Now that went up from 5% the years before, so women are very underrepresented in the parliament in Sri Lanka. But in Sweden, it is a staggering 46%. There alone, you can see the huge discrepancy between genders in Sri Lanka and in Sweden. It is mind-boggling to me that there is such a big difference between the two countries. The next point I want to talk about is social interaction. And in order to explain this system, I'm going to tell you a story. The story begins with a young girl who was an exchange student. She moved to Sri Lanka for 3 months and she met my mom. Very randomly, I don't know exactly where, but she met my mom, and my mom, as usual, very warm-hearted, very welcoming, she invited the girl for lunch or for dinner, I can't remember, to her home. Anytime my mom meets somebody who lives in Sweden or knows somebody lives in Sweden, she obviously always refers back to me. So she struck up a conversation with this young girl and she thought she'd invite her home because she's a young girl there, she doesn't know everybody, and my mom just spontaneously invited her for dinner. The girl graciously accepted and she came over for dinner. Once she came for dinner, she proceeded to explain to my mum how worried her mother had been in Sweden, that she was going to go to dinner to a random lady's home. Now, for her mum, who was in Sweden, it was just unfathomable that a strange woman, somebody who didn't know her daughter, had invited her daughter to come into her home for a meal. She was worried. She told her daughter to be careful. Why is this lady inviting you? What is her agenda? What is her ulterior motive? It was no ulterior motive than just to have her over for dinner, enjoy some conversation, and really allow that girl to create a little bit of a social circle in Sri Lanka. But that's what we do in Sri Lanka. We are very quick to invite people to our homes, develop friendships, to talk to them on a first name basis. We can be a little bit intrusive, not everybody. Sometimes they can ask you like little extra private questions that you might not want to answer. But for the most part, we are so welcoming, so warm hearted. That's the way it is in Sri Lanka. Social interaction is something that the Sri Lankans crave. They talk, they are very, very friendly from the get go. But you see, specifically from that story, how a Swedish person would react to that kind of an invitation. It's not the norm here in Sweden. Now, I have done a video on whether I think Swedes are unfriendly, and I don't think they're unfriendly at all. But it is not the norm here in Sweden to just randomly meet somebody and invite them to your home in Sweden. That just never ever happens. You have to build up your friendships for a long time. You know somebody who knows somebody. Even then, it takes a long time to build up to when you are actually invited to somebody's home for dinner. Swedes are more reserved. They're more respectful of private space. They want to give the other person respect as well. And your home is a very, very private space. So in order to bring somebody into your home, I think it does take a while for the Swedes to warm up to the idea, getting you to know you better. They might meet you out for a fika and get to know you that way, but getting somebody into your home and really initially starting off the conversation and asking private questions and just, being friendly and making people feel welcome and warm, and all of those things are very prominent in Sri Lanka. And they do exist in Sweden. I'm not saying they don't exist in Sweden, but the culture is so different that the Swedes are a lot more reserved, a lot more standoffish, but they don't really mean to. And I find that a huge difference in the culture when it comes to social interaction. But is anyone better than the other? No, it's not. It really depends on what you feel comfortable with. Number three, a really big difference between the two countries is respect for hierarchy. Now, Sweden has been a country that has been using first name basis for a while now. It never used to be like that in the 1960s. I understand it was different, but since then, children use first name basis with their teachers, with their nursery teachers, with your boss, with all of your colleagues, all of the people who are senior to you. There is no sir, there is no madam, there is no title calling here, any of those things in Sweden. Everybody is supposed to be equal, even though obviously there is a hierarchical system here. You have bosses. I mean, I have a boss, but you can argue with your boss. You can tell your boss when they're wrong or when you think they're wrong, or you can tell your boss, I am not comfortable doing this. I won't be doing this. And there are a lot of rules and regulations set in place for the employee. So the hierarchy system here is pretty non-existent, I would think. I mean, it is in some way a plus point and in some ways a negative. So even for children, they're on a first name basis with a lot of their uncles and their aunts. And Sri Lanka is a complete 160 because it is so integrated into the Sri Lankan system where they call them aunties and uncles. Even if they're not your real aunt and uncle, you call them auntie and you call them uncle out of respect. Children call their teachers by miss and most often their surnames. Employees always call their bosses sir or madam. There's always that hierarchical system in Sri Lanka that is very, very prevalent. If you go to Sri Lanka, you will notice it, especially if you're working. Now, it is probably getting a little bit better, but for the most part, the hierarchical system is very prevalent in that country, and it is almost non-existent in Sweden. Now, in my opinion, there again, I'd like a sort of a balance between the two. I do find that it's good for children to call somebody auntie and uncle. Sometimes I do that here as well. I do prefer if my kids could call their teachers sir or ma'am or by their surnames. Sometimes a few small tweaks, sometimes not all the time, but I do like to teach my children when they're on the bus to stand up so older people get their seats, and to respect older people, even if they disagree with them, to disagree respectfully, to argue respectfully. And if I was raising my kids in Sri Lanka, I would want to give them a balance as well. Make sure that they were able to argue with their adults and not just say yes, yes to everything, because that's what happens when you have this really strong hierarchical system. Nobody, or a lot of people, are really afraid to question authority. And it is important to be able to question authority, because that's how you're going to learn, that's how you're going to develop, and that's how you're going to learn to stand up for yourself. And in Sri Lanka, a lot of people just follow the hierarchical system. And in Sweden, obviously, years and years of change and years of practice has allowed the Swedes to create this sort of very equal balance between everybody. Do I agree with both of them? Like I said, I think a balance is the perfect way to go. Finally, I want to talk about this. This one is very close to my heart, and I wish I could do more. And I'm sure I could do more. I'm sitting here in Sweden talking about this on YouTube, so I don't think I do anything to help this situation, but the discrepancy between the rich and the poor in Sri Lanka is huge. And in Sweden, it's pretty non existent. I mean, I'm not saying that there are no rich people in Sweden, there are plenty of rich people. But what I'm talking about are the general public. Between all of us, it is pretty equal. I mean, we all can afford a basic house, which, whether it be a flat or a townhouse like we live in, it is affordable. I mean, even if I was to compare to England, there was no way my husband and I, on our salaries, would be able to afford a house like this, a townhouse like this in England. It is not possible. It is so expensive there, and it is the same in Sri Lanka. Buying a home in Sri Lanka is very, very expensive. The rich children in Sri Lanka, their parents buy them properties. Their parents give them the money for the land, because it is impossible to buy there. And I don't know how the middle class in Sri Lanka survive it. Really, really difficult for them. And the poor people in Sri Lanka, they live in their villages. So they live in either huts or these homes. They use a fire to cook their food. They live very simple lives. I mean, if you were to ask them about travel or going even out to restaurants, I mean, it's not an experience that they've ever had in Sri Lanka. Why I was able to come to Sweden, why I have such a rich, fulfilled life, and most of my dreams have all come true. I have absolutely no idea why I was given this life, and why in Sri Lanka there are some women just like me, working as hard or even harder than me, much smarter than me, much more capable than me, haven't got those same opportunities. And it's just because the corruption level in Sri Lanka has been so high for so many years that the money is never put back into the country and never put back into the people. It is such a shame, because Sri Lanka has so much potential. It is one of the most beautiful countries you will ever visit. And if you're a Swede wondering whether you should visit Sri Lanka, I'm telling you, you must. You must visit Sri Lanka. It is one of the most beautiful countries. And a side note, you don't even need a visa anymore to go to Sri Lanka, which is really great. You must visit the country. It is so beautiful. And I wish we could do something to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor in Sri Lanka and give everybody similar opportunities like we do here in Sweden. So these are the biggest differences from my perspective about Sri Lanka and Sweden. Please leave me a comment in the description box below if any of these things were new to you. And I really hope that you listen to this video and you understand where I'm coming from. It's just my perspective. If you're watching from Sri Lanka and you have anything to add, please leave it in the description box below. I'm going to make a series of this, so please let me know what you'd like to see next. I will try and cater to your requests. Thank you so much for being here. Give this video a thumbs up, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.